Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis? Hope you're having a great Saturday. It is slipping away, y'all. It's already 4 o'clock. I have so much to do. It feels great to be home in my element, in my studio. And so after I get done doing this, guess what you girls got to do? Go pack for tomorrow because I'm back at it, back on the road to Walterboro. But I think we're getting there. We'll talk about it in just a second. Real quick, big thank you to Stephanie, Ebony, Teresa, Ginger, Candace, and Buretta. It's Bureda. If I said that wrong, I really apologize. Let me know. Like, type it out how you say it, and I'll correct it on the next episode if I got that wrong. So what is happening? What's on tap for next week in the Alec Murdaugh double murder trial? Well, at the end of the day yesterday, the defense said they want to split closings, let Dick Harpootlian do half, Jim Griffin do the other half. The state objected. The judge not feeling it, I don't think. So the defense has 4 final witnesses. They should wrap up their case on Monday afternoon. The state has 2 rebuttal witnesses. I originally heard that they were going to be lengthy, but Creighton Waters said yesterday they will not be lengthy. So we're looking at maybe closings on Wednesday. That would be good. I don't know if we'll get verdict next week, but it would be nice. You know, I think it would definitely be nice to save me another week from going down there and sitting around. But hey, if that's what it takes, we're going to see it through to the end. And Jeanette will be there next week. I'm super excited to get to hang out with her, and we'll be tag teaming it for you. All right. Well, let's jump into our music fact of the day, Woodstock. I always say if there's one moment in time I could go back to where I couldn't change the world for something better, just a selfish Back to the Future trip or Back to the Past trip, it would be Woodstock. I'm serious. Yeah. So there were 3 deaths at Woodstock. No confirmed births. That was something that I always had heard, that babies were born at Woodstock. And I was like, why could I have been born at Woodstock? But 3 young men died during the festival that weekend. 2 were from drug overdoses. And then a 17-year-old was actually ran over by a tractor that was gathering up garbage. The young man was asleep in a sleeping bag. There were, however, 8 women who lost their babies there. So when the festival was over, the New York State Department of Health, they said they had 5,162 medical cases over those 4 days, with 800 of those being drug related. So we jump back into cross-exam. That's where we left off on Thursday, picked right up yesterday morning. Creighton Waters was on for the state and just says your stealing increased over the years. But Alec agrees with that, but he denies that the stealing increased after the boat crash. But he says the documents may prove him wrong. That's a couple of things that I think he decided to do for strategic reasons. Number one, admitting to all these financial crimes on the stand. We know he admitted to taking the Tony Satterfield and his brother's money, but he admitted to a lot more thefts on the stand. And I think it's when your goose is cooked, it's just, why fight it? Why try? I mean, he had to go on the stand. These are some questions that only he could answer. It would not have served him well to leave this unanswered. Otherwise, that gives the state more fuel in their closings to say, hey, well, now we got his voice on the kennels. We never heard why. We never had him explain that. I think this has been coming on for a while. Probably as soon as they heard about the kennel video, they said, oh man, you got to go on the stand. But I do think that some of the canned answers that Alec gave about I lied, I stole from people I love, I had no right to take their money, however it went, part of that is just compliance. It's nothing that he's disputing. But at the same time, I do think that those canned responses were kind of a way in being so agreeable on certain things with Creighton Waters that I think Alec knew it might get under his skin too. And I think it did a few times. There were times where he would just give his canned response, such as, well, you know, the documents will tell you exactly, and I'll go by what the documents say. So I think that was probably a better choice than trying to explain every little thing. But still, there were times I think it got under the prosecutor's skin. So the prosecutor points out in 2019, Alex stole 3.7 million, which is more than any other year. That also was the boat crash year, which, by the way, yesterday was the anniversary, 4-year anniversary of that boat crash that killed the beautiful Mallory Beach. So I was thinking about her friends and family and everybody who knew and loved her yesterday. She also has the family has set up a foundation, and it's called Mal's Pals. And so it's an animal organization. So if you're inclined, I'll put that link out on social media and you can go make a donation in Mallory's memory. And it goes to pets. So there's nothing wrong there with giving you money to a good cause. So they talk about his income. And the prosecutor said that Alex's income had been kind of slowly dwindling since 2015. And Alex said his income speaks for itself. He said there's an ebb and a flow to his income. Some years were more profitable. They had some lean years in there. And since Labor Day weekend, he hasn't disputed that he stole from his clients. Creighton Water says, we've heard that. And Alex says, yeah, you keep asking. Got a little jabby here and there between the two of them. Then he gives this canned response. I misled people I love. I stole money that didn't belong to me. I was wrong. And he said there was a lot of reasons he stole that money. The prosecutor points out his line of credit from Palmetto State Bank was for $1 million, and that was almost maxed out, as well as another one from a $600,000 line of credit. In 2021, he borrowed money from his dad, Johnny Parker, Palmetto State Bank. And Alec also mentions the equity in Edisto and Moselle, which Alec said Moselle had a substantial equity. We talked about that in the previous episode where he broke down the equity in the houses. So then they start talking about Brett Boulware, and he gets emotional when he's talking about him. I believe that they co-owned some of those islands off Hilton Head together, and those land deals went a little south after the recession hit, and the partners were unable to pay their share of the property. So Alec paid himself and said the amount could be in the millions of what he had to fork over to keep these properties. He said that's actually part of the way he was able to get Moselle. When asked about stealing from Barrett, Alec said Barrett had owed me so much money that when I took his money, I just didn't tell him. He said it was a lie by omission, but he also said his justifications didn't make it okay. He said sometimes he would ask a partner, hey, how much do you think this case is worth? So if the partner said, oh, 100,000, Alec would go for 300 and keep the excess for himself. He said it didn't make it right. No kidding. They talk about his addiction, and he said he was a functioning addict. And he talks about how many pills he would take on a day, which depended on the strength of the pills he had. So he started off with 130 milligram oxycodone, which he said made him sick to his stomach. It makes me super sick to my stomach. But he would mix it with OxyContin, and ultimately anywhere between 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams a day. And he says he can still remember that first time he took an OxyContin. Now, functioning addicts is something that I've met people like that. I think it's very plausible that he was able to function even if he had a raging opioid habit. However, I do not think that dude was spending all that money on pills. He would not have a liver. There's no way. I don't doubt he was taking pills. A lot of people over time, he talks about his tolerance, and the pills gave him energy and would take enough just to keep him from withdrawing. But when you're building up and you get a tolerance, what you have to take to keep from withdrawing becomes more and more over time, and then you've got a beast. So I don't doubt that he had an opioid addiction. It doesn't take much. And whether he's taking 70 pills a day or 7, if you're depending on that to function and to feel good, a lot of people get a euphoric feeling with opioids. They feel like everything's right in the world. They're chatty sometimes. It just makes you feel good. And so you can take 7 a day and have that feeling throughout the day. I just don't understand with taking dozens and dozens and dozens of pills, how he was able to function. So I think that the amount that he claims he took certainly doesn't match up with the money or what I think he could tolerate without having respiratory distress, like number one, is way less than what he claims, though. He said that if he did not take the medication, the first sign of withdrawal with him would be agitation. I think that would have been a better motive for the state than this. He killed them because his finances were unraveling. Because a lot of this has centered around the drug use at times, not all the time, but at times. And I really think with him saying things like the agitation was the tip of the iceberg with, with withdrawals, which means that other physical things come, and he talks about it in a second. But I think that that motive is a lot more viable than that other. There are several other motives I think the state could have gone with, but they're in it now, so it's about money. He talked about detoxing and it made him sick. He said your joints hurt, you have severe uncontrollable diarrhea, you're vomiting, you might suddenly profusely start to sweat. And he said he would have jumpy legs, which makes you want to get up and move more. Those symptoms would last 18 to 24 hours. He tried to self detox hundreds of times. And as far as the paranoid thoughts, they started way before the murders. He would keep pills on him, also on his person, so nobody would find him. He said Buster, Paul, and Maggie, his dad and his brothers, all saw him detox, although his brothers didn't see it until after that roadside shooting. And Creighton Waters asked if he remembers calling Paul a little detective, and he said it was more Maggie that did. So they talk about a cataract surgery that Alec had during COVID. Maggie drove him there, but couldn't go in because you know how it was when COVID was around at full force. That's when Maggie found those pills that her and Paul both texted him about the month before the murders. That was the text where Paul said he was still at Edisto Beach. They needed to talk. Mom found your pills. He said Maggie and Paul watched him like a hawk for years, and finding pills like they did in May, it was an ongoing battle. So I think he really is just trying to remove any motivation that might have been a reason he killed them. So, but you kind of do see where maybe the state's trying to kind of slip in an alternative motive theory. And look, that's what the jurors can go back and use their common sense for. If they think that, well, it doesn't really fit for the financials like they say, but maybe I think it has to do with the fact that Maggie and Paul were on him about these drugs. And there's one thing you don't do is threaten to take away an addict's supply or threaten to leave if whatever. We don't know that happened. I'm just giving an example. I think that introducing that could give jurors something else to chew on potentially. So he recalled a time they had found some pills, and he just had to admit to Maggie and Paul that he was back on them. And he said, I just couldn't stay off of them. But he promised Paul as soon as they finished the boat case, he would go to rehab. Although I think that's a little, I don't know, I kind of think it's a little unfair. It's almost saying like the reason I'm taking him is because of this boat lawsuit. A lot of times, though, addicts will do that. They project their addiction issues onto people or will blame others or other reasons when really it's complicated. Addiction, I think, is like any disease you have. It gets worse sometimes, it gets better sometimes, but you can't. I don't think a lot of times you can control it. Now, I'm not saying that I think every single move he made definitely pointed to him struggling with addiction, but I do think that it is credible that he had something there. After seeing the text messages, especially from Maggie and Paul, there's validation this was a problem before the murder. So it is something. He recalled a time where Paul covered for him. And that's because Maggie worried so much about his pill usage. Paul covered for his dad, saying that Alec had gotten the pills in anticipation for that eye surgery, but he didn't use them. And then he said, this is just one example of many where he let them down with his addiction. Alec says to Creighton that he's hearing things for the first time, but says when he got arrested, they reached out to the state to talk to them about some things and never got a return call. The prosecutor fires back and asked if he ever reached out to law enforcement or the state to tell the truth about being at the kennels, and Alex said no. So Jim Griffin objects a few times, and then the public got really loud during one exchange between Jim Griffin and the state and then the judge. So ultimately, Judge Newman says to Mr. Griffin, sit down, Mr. Griffin. And like the place starts clapping, and the public's been amazing. I've met people from all over the country, very few that are actually local. So most people in that courtroom are traveling there to hear that case and see it in person. But sometimes it does feel a little like you're sitting in a real life reality show because you follow these trials online. You watch the documentaries, and all of a sudden you're in the courtroom with Alec Murdaugh. It's a very surreal feeling to be in a courtroom sometimes with people you've covered their cases for a while, and then to be there in person, it's just very surreal. But I I think it's in poor taste. It's There's two people that have been brutally murdered, and this is not like watching on your live stream at home. You're in the courtroom. You're in there with the family. You're in there with everybody. And so the judge at the beginning of the next break reminded the public to contain their reactions to any testimony. And it really wasn't a problem after. Still, some people get verbal after something is said and things like that, but it wasn't the clapping, which is over the top for me. It's just tacky. So Alex said he tried to talk to them up until the time they charged him with the murders. Now, I would have been the opposite. And I would have said, okay, you charged me for murder. Let's sit down and talk about a lot of stuff because I'm going to tell you how things went. The prosecutor said the reason nobody's heard the new explanation of the kennel video is because people close to him have identified his voice. And because of that, he had to come up with a new lie. Then he goes to the HBO Max documentary. If you've seen it, you know Jim Griffin is on there. And he says your attorney was repeating your story as late as November of 2022, which was that you were home napping and you never went to the kennels. So Jim Griffin stands up and objects on attorney-client privilege, and Judge Newman's like, "The TV interviews are not, it's kind of you did away with that attorney-client privilege when you went on national TV." Alec points out the documentary was actually filmed much sooner than it aired, it was put out in November last year. They talk about Miss Seckinger confronting him on the day of the murders. He said it actually was not a long conversation and it was interrupted by somebody else. He really thought it was more of a concern about him hiding money for the boat case as opposed to her really kind of being on him about the stealing. He said she was almost apologetic about confronting him and disagreed with her when she said it was a confrontation when she was on the stand. But he said that's what she feels it was. And Alex said what he put them through was hard, and he has seen since this trial started just how hard it's been. He said that her confronting him did not cause paranoia, and he denies confronting also Mark Tinsley at the lawyer conference. Remember that there's that story where he walks up and says, "Hey, Bo." Now in the South, people do call people Bo. Hey, Bo. I don't know. Go figure where it comes from. As the crow flies, as I sit here, those are all very Southern sayings, and they all came out in this trial. Like solid proof this is a South Carolina trial. He said, "Well, I got the chicken out of Bubba's mouth, got on my golf cart, went and got the spit cut and got on the couch." That's a very South Carolina trial, y'all, right there, summed up in that one little paragraph. So they showed texts between Maggie and Alec when they're at the baseball tournament. That was the weekend before the murders. Now, Alec was withdrawing, and Maggie told him to stay at the hotel because it's not the place to be if you don't want to feel well. You got to remember, it's June, it's hot. All of South Carolina's hot. The mid-country, like Columbia area, is really hot in the summer. I don't know. It's weird. We have the mountains in here in the upstate that, I mean, it still gets deathly hot. I can lose 5 pounds of water weight checking my mailbox in the summer. But at the same time, that's the thing too. One thing I want to mention is anybody I know that lives in South Carolina that's following this trial, the one thing everybody has said without a doubt is I totally understand Alec when he says, "Look, I took my shower. If I go to the kennels, I'm going to sweat. I'm going to have to take another shower." That's kind of how you gauge what you're going to do and when you're going to do it here in the South. You make sure you do all your outdoor activities before you take your shower. Because with the humidity, we can have 90% humidity and it's 100 degrees here. So everybody in South Carolina was like, "Look, I ain't even mad that he didn't want to go back down to the kennels after taking a shower," because that's how you do it here. Otherwise, your water bill's a lot higher in the summer, I'll tell you that. So back to the text messages, he said he couldn't stay at the hotel. It was checkout time. They were making him leave. There's some chit chat about their seats being better that day. And Maggie asks Alec to bring her charger. So we finally get to the murders, the day of the murders, June 7th. He got up, left in the afternoon to go to work. He was working on what he thought could be his biggest case yet. So he finished the financials for the boat case that day and talked to Miss Seckinger. He left after 6, got back to Moselle around 6:45, rode the property with Paul. They shot the gun at the firing range. It was a .22, not a blackout. The state mentions that he told law enforcement they were out looking for hogs, and Alec said, if I told him that, it would have meant we were looking for signs of hogs. And he goes on to explain how they plant these food plots for animals, for deer, for dove, in different fields. The thing is, the hogs come and eat it and make a mess of it. So they just eliminated some of that population. But hunting hogs is a nighttime activity. You don't do it during the day. He doesn't dispute the time the Snapchat video was taken. He talked about how Paul and Maggie went to the kennels together. Alec said Maggie asked him to go, but he said no. Then he said she would ask him to do things and he would initially say no, but most of the time he would go ahead and change his mind quickly. So he decided to go down to the kennels. Took him 2 minutes to get from the main house to the kennels on the golf cart. He arrived shortly before Paul took that kennel video. Little detective left 2 final clues: the snap video, the kennel video. The state asked if he didn't think it was important to tell law enforcement when he last saw Paul and Maggie alive. I think this is a very, very big thing that this jury is going to be thinking about at deliberations, because if you put yourself in his shoes, you would tell law enforcement, look, I left down there about 8:49 or whatever time. I went home, stayed a few minutes, left and went to my mom's, came back. That's the last time I saw them, because I don't think that we would have as much of, I don't want to say, this is not a slam dunk case. I mean, on one hand, it is, you've got the circumstantial evidence. On the other hand, there is a lot of reasonable doubt. There's nothing that directly puts the murder weapon in his hand. Yeah, I know it's a family gun that's missing. Her blood's on Paul's shotgun. I get all that. It's not lost on me. I'm just playing devil's advocate here. I have not made up my mind one way or the other as of right now. To be honest, I want to finish the whole case. I want to hear closings from both sides. And I have to say, this is probably the first trial I've ever covered where I don't know that I know exactly what happened that night, but something did, obviously. And I'm not sure that Alec is totally clean, but then at the same time, you think about that, people talk about the timeline being tight. It's really tight, but that also can play to his favor, because you think about it, you commit a double murder. You have got to, so you're looking at, we know steps were taken on Maggie's phone at like 8:52 to 54, something of that nature. So shortly after Paul was murdered, my theory is this: Paul was shot first. Maggie heard something or probably saw poor Paul laying there, went running towards, and then obviously saw the shooter or heard or felt the first shot, and then she's running away. They talked about that Siri activation on the side of the phone. I do wonder if she wasn't trying to call 911. I've done it accidentally trying to power my phone off, where if you hit the up button and the power button at the same time, if you're an Android user, what happens is by default, your iPhone, when a certain button sequence is pushed on those side buttons, it will call 911 for you. I really do think that if you think about what Dr. Kinsey testified, which is Paul initially shot, stands there, walks very slowly to the door. I do think whoever fired that first shot, I don't think that they expected Paul to be alive based on the angle. Maybe they heard him shuffling slowly towards the door. Maybe Alec did not want Paul to see who was shooting him, if that's the case. It's interesting. But you think about the amount of time standing still slowly. He's 20 entrance and exit wounds. He's in pain. He's not upright. He's moving very slow. We know that by the 90-degree blood drops. From the angle he was shot at, it just makes me think that they were expecting him to either collapse before he got to the door or whatever. So I think Maggie was maybe trying to hide. I think those footprints in that sandy area behind the kennels or the shed, they were last. They were on top. Then you got that print on the back of her calf. Maybe she was trying to kind of hide herself, crouched down to not be seen. But it's really unbelievable to think that Maggie was oblivious to what had happened to Paul, just based on where she was found, how many times she was shot, kind of the progression of those gunshot wounds. I could sit and talk about this technical stuff all day. But at the end of the day, I don't envy this jury. It seems obvious to people who think he's 100% guilty that it should be an easy choice. And then there are a lot of divided opinions. Some people really just say, I'm not convinced. And I'm surprised. A lot of my listeners, "Oh, I thought he was guilty, but after this trial, I really don't know." That's kind of where I am, y'all. I just don't know. I don't know that he's innocent, but I don't know that he actually pulled the trigger, because for me, there is a big difference between being a thief and a double murderer. But this is not your average person either. This is somebody who lies so well and so convincingly so often that that alone, and I see in a way why the prosecution has really focused in on the liar aspect, because now he's on the stand and he has an answer for everything. So it's just very interesting all the way around, all the way around. So they go back to when he was coming down to the kennels. He said when he got there, he pulled the cart next to Maggie, and Paul was standing in the driveway fooling around with Cash, the dog, which is Rogan's dog. He said Paul was close to the kennels, but not inside. He said Maggie was watching the dogs between the buildings where she could see the trees through there. If you remember the day before, Alec testified that the dogs would go and relieve themselves on every tree back behind that kennel building. He said he stayed on that golf cart after getting there until Bubba got the chicken. He didn't tell Maggie he was going to check on his mom while they were down at the kennels. He said Maggie was worried about Paul's blood pressure and the swelling of the feet, and they had talked about that. He said the state asked if dogs were barking and acting like someone was around, and Alec said there was nobody around to sense. Now, I was like, ooh, and I was waiting for that latch on to that statement, but it did not happen, at least not in a big way. I would have exploited that till the cows come home. The state asks what happened after he put the chicken on the shelf. Well, he got on the golf cart, went back to the house. The state asked why he left so quickly, and Alec said he was about to do what he didn't want to do if he went. And then he pauses, and we're all kind of like sitting up in our chair, leaning in, and like, "What's that?" And he says, "Sweat." When asked if he told Maggie and Paul goodbye, he said, "I'm sure I told them I was leaving." There's something said about Alec jetting there and back, and Alec said he takes issue with how the prosecutor is changing what he's saying and using words he isn't using. So the state says you leave the kennels at 8:47 and took 2 minutes to get to the house at 8:49, which is the same time that their phones were last locked as well. Alec went inside, maybe got a spit cup, went straight to the couch, and maybe dozed. He's also reminded that he originally told law enforcement that he took an hour nap in previous statements. He denies having a 300 blackout on that golf cart that night and says he didn't hear anything. He said he thought he heard somebody pull up, and the prosecution says you can't hear a 300 blackout being fired in rapid succession, but you can hear somebody pull up. Alec says he did not wash his hands after putting the chicken on the shelf, and he did not touch the hose pipe at all. Our next partner is Athletic Greens. I take AG1 by Athletic Greens literally every day. I gave AG1 a try because I'm always busy and my diet isn't the best, but I still want to get all the vitamins my body needs without taking a ton of pills. I take AG1 in the morning before my first cup of coffee, and it makes me feel ready to take on my day. Why take a bunch of different things when you can just mix 1 scoop of powder in water once a day? It's the healthiest thing you can do in under a minute. With 1 scoop, I'm getting 75 vitamins and minerals that help my mood, energy levels, and healthier hair, skin, and nails. It's delivered to me every month, and it's been the easiest way to arm my body with everything it needs to tackle my day. If you're looking for an easier way to take supplements, Athletic Greens is giving you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/whattheworld. That's athleticgreens.com/whattheworld. Check it out. So they get into the timeline a little bit. This is really when the jury started perking up and listening intently, because you point out this timeline. I do think, though, if you're thinking about if he did it, so this, I'm just looking at it from both sides. From a defense standpoint, I'm going to say, okay, so he kills them. We got steps on Maggie's phone at 8:54, at least up to 8:54. He leaves at 9:06 to go to his mom's. Now, we know they found blood on the steering wheel, but we don't know if that came before or after the murders, right? He says after, could be before if he committed the murders. But here's my thing. How are you going to go get a shower, get up to your house, get a shower, and then leave within 12 minutes. I mean, maybe you can do it. I get it. But then you've got for me, where are the clothes? Like, what did he do with those clothes, y'all? They had smokehouses, they had skinning shacks on that property. If it were me, I would have went and cleaned up in the skinning shack because they can't swab every square inch of that skinning shack, and you got to know where to swab when you're looking for DNA. And I think that is a place that, in my mind, if he were to clean off, that would be the obvious choice to do it, not your house. A lot of people assume too that he's just going to be drenched in biological material. Number one, we don't know what he was wearing over his body if he did. Now the raincoat, no DNA his was found on it. There was gunshot residue. It's an old jacket. I know Anjanette's tried to find it online with no luck. So like we were talking, it could have been Randolph's. It could have been something, but I don't understand why. I don't think Shelly had a reason to lie about him carrying this blue tarp. She doesn't have a dog in the fight. She's saying what she saw. So everything he has an answer for, but he lies. So it's like, what do you believe? I mean, you can't really necessarily believe him. Yeah, I'm just more talking out loud today. I'll just keep going. So the records say that Paul was at the house at 8:05, and he says those times don't fit Alex's new story. Alex says when he left, Paul was at the shop. And when asked if he put his phone in the Suburban, he said probably not. He said he doesn't have a set spot he puts his phone, and he may have taken it to the bathroom when he took a shower. So they were talking about the lack of footprints and then the increase in footprints or something like that. So Creighton points out Alex's story of saying his phone fell in between the center console, and that's why he had to stop in his mom's driveway for over a minute. And he points out too that he's very full of specific recollection about that, but you're so fuzzy on other things. And it's something that I noticed yesterday. So Creighton did the whole, I'm just going to let him run his mouth and dig him a hole. And I think sometimes it worked. He would get flustered talking around the question. He would re-ask the question to the prosecutor, and then he would sort of dance around and answer and go so long that maybe you kind of forgot the question you asked. And I noticed he did that in some of the jail calls with Buster too, by the way, especially about buying, somebody offering to buy shoes or something. And Buster points out, well, I thought you were in a pod by yourself, like on the medical wing. And then he just runs around the answer. So is that just how he talks? But I notice it's more of when he doesn't have a direct answer to something, it becomes 10 paragraphs of an explanation. So I'm just thinking like a juror, which is what are they going to be thinking individually when they go back there? Maybe they all think this man's guilty of sin. I will not be surprised, hung, jury, or guilty. Either way, if those, it's not going to be a not guilty. That will surprise me. And so I'm not going to be gasping when they say hung, jury, not guilty, whatever. I think, these jurors, they'll give it their go. And we have to trust the jury because we're not the jury, right? Juries are unpredictable. So expect the unexpected, especially as crazy as this case has been from day one. So it was really funny. At one point, Creighton asked why he had a lot of steps between 902 and 906. And Alex says, I don't remember. So the prosecutor says, were you running in place? Were you doing jumping jacks? Alex says, I know what I wasn't doing, cleaning off guns or putting guns in a raincoat. So he also points out that Alex was making a lot of phone calls. Were you running in place when you were making those? I was dead, y'all. I was about to fall out in the aisle. It was pretty funny. At 9:05, Alec called his dad. Alex said, I could have been walking. Maybe it was movement with the phone. And the state points out he's making calls and texting Maggie, who is just 1,000 yards away down at the kennels. He said, there's no reason to go to the kennels. He said, him telling her he's leaving isn't odd. And it's also not odd for nobody to pick up their phone or text on the property. He says, you've heard how the cell service is on this property. He didn't think anything about it because he said Maggie was with Paul. And he got emotional as he said that. He also points out, too, as a lawyer, he knows that your phone calls don't go away just because you delete them, which you have to think, though, he's not thinking like a lawyer if he's just murdered his wife and son either. He's thinking of that knee-jerk, I just got to get this off my phone, not probably registering, yes, I'm a lawyer, and I would just subpoena those records. He said he didn't ask Maggie to go visit his mom with him because visiting Miss Libby made her sad. He said at dinner, they talked about Paul and his blood pressure issues. Alex said He learned after the murders that Maggie actually came home because she was worried about him. He saw this in a text between Blanca and Maggie, and the state said Maggie's sister testified that Maggie told her Alec requested she come home. He said he didn't ask her to come, and Alec said he always wanted Maggie home, and he would tell her he wanted her home even before she left to go back to Edisto. They talk about the calls Alec made on the way to Alameda. Then the prosecutor points out Alec saying he was at his mom 45 minutes to an hour. And Alec said he's always said to check the data so they would know how long he was somewhere during the time frame. Alec is asked about trying to influence Miss Shelley, and he said he simply told her that Sled would be in touch and she needed to cooperate. He said he asked Blanca about his clothing, but didn't tell her what to say about his clothing to Sled. I find it hard to believe that you got two people that serve this family are going to lie or and implicate that something nefarious was afoot with the intention he had, because I don't see these two women. They seemed very credible to me. And I think that's something that jurors are going to think about as well, because I'm pretty sure the state's going to bring that up in closings and remind them that you got two witnesses that seem like you and me. They're everyday people. They're working their job. And when the investigation turned to Alec, why would both of them say, yeah, he told me to cover for him, essentially? So I think that's a little powerful piece that I hope that the state really uses when they do their closing. So at 9:42, he leaves for Moselle, turns into the property at 10:01, and went to the house first, as we know, then to the kennels. And they talk about the 911 call. Alex said he had checked him for a pulse. He said he doesn't remember when he told 911 that he checked for a pulse. He said he knows that he saw Paul and then called 911, then went to the bodies. But the prosecution points out, you told law enforcement that you checked the bodies before calling 911. Of course, Alex says that's not what I remember. I don't think I said that. He remembers being on the phone with 911 when he checked Paul. He said he pulled up and saw them and believes he went back and got his phone before he checked the bodies. He said he was on that 911 call for a while when there was nothing going on the phone call, and that's when he went to check them. He said he tried to turn Paul over. He said he grabbed his belt loop. And then he says that's when his cell phone pops out. I just don't understand. He said then he went to Maggie. They talk about Rogan. He said Rogan is like a son to me. Roro, by the way, that's his nickname. Everybody in the South has nicknames, though, y'all. Roro, Bubba, Paul, that kind of thing. He said he decided to lie because his law partners told him not to talk. And also, he said he had a distrust of Sled. He said he's not blaming anyone, that he blames responsibility for why he is where he is. But he said that he takes responsibility for a series of events and that his paranoia was also a factor. He said when the paranoia hit under normal circumstances, he could kind of shoo it away. And when asked if he chucked his pills before handing over his clothes, Alex said he took them out in the bedroom before he handed his clothes over to Sled. He said when David Owens, who was the officer there, asked about his family relationships, that's when he decided to lie. So the state plays the car interview, pausing after just about every statement. Is this when you decided to lie? He explains his distrust of Sled and says it was for a few reasons. He said the way they had been involved with Paul's criminal charges. He also says rumors about Paul and Buster, which he didn't specifically say, but I kind of automatically assume this is about Stephen Smith. And also the charges against a friend, Greg Alexander. He said that Sled brought manufactured charges against him. And in fact, he and his dad sat with Greg at his trial. So I looked this up, and Greg Alexander was a police captain who was indicted for official misconduct in office, breach of trust of $10,000 or more, and breach of trust less than $1,000. So he had been accused of stealing more than $10,000 that was taken during traffic stops. He was acquitted for that. And we should note that, according to Fitz News, Alec cut Greg a check for $5,000 on July 9th of 2021, just a month and 2 days after the murders. It's just, I'm not implicating anything. I do think it's interesting. I was going through some old notes, looking up Greg Alexander, and had this in my notes from way back. He also said that he mistook Dave Owen for the SLED agent who was involved in that Alexander indictment. And the prosecutor said, "Here's a new one." And Alex said, "Not a new one." He said he never thought any of the kids who were on the boat the night that Mallory Beach was killed, in the boat driven by a drunk Paul, had anything to do with the murder, nor the family of those kids. He said there were so many half truths and leaks about the case in the media, and the response to that on social media was vile and over the top. So they really just didn't take the threats credible because they were so out there. He said the wrong person read this stuff and someone hated Paul Murdaugh. He said he still believes that to this day, that this centers around somebody just reading some stuff about Paul, deciding they hate him and taking him out. The prosecutor very smartly points out, yeah, somebody knew Paul would be at the kennels, knew you wouldn't be gone, or you would be gone. They just hoped that you would have some guns and ammo laying around. Alex says, I believe some of that. Don't forget that the 300 blackout was pretty much the same. The casings were the same as the ones found all over the property. It was a family gun. When asked why he drove so fast to and from Alameda that night, Alex said, I wasn't in a hurry. They show a photo of this golf cart by the house, and Alex says that's not where anybody in that family would have parked that golf cart, and explains to charge that golf cart, you have to lift that seat up. The outlet is near the porch right there at the house, so they have a little concrete pad they would pull up to. He said this picture had to be taken the next day, obviously, because it was daylight. June 10th interview. He recounts the evening in the interview, and the prosecutor says all that was a lie. And Alex said the part about not going to the kennels was a lie. So back on the video, Alec asked if they have any clues or any helpful evidence. The agent says they're analyzing shell casings, the dustings on the doorknob to the feed room, and also, by the way, buddy, we need a buccal swab from you. Alex says Paul had a good intuition, a little detective. Now, previously, he really said that he didn't call Paul that. It was more Maggie, but he did call him a little detective in this interview. When asked why he brought that up about being a little detective, Creighton said, well, Alex said that's because that was his personality. That was who Paul was. Jim Griffin is there in this interview, and he said the last time he saw Paul and Maggie was at supper, and he did not go to the kennels. Alex said, you said earlier David Owen was mean to me. He was never mean to me. I thought David was the guy from Greg Alexander's trial. What they did to Greg was terrible. And then you told law enforcement you weren't sure there was a replacement blackout rifle. And Alex said, you're absolutely wrong. Sled had talked to the gun maker, and the gun maker said he could not find the paperwork for the replacement. It seems like a year ago, but the gun maker did testify towards the beginning of the trial, saying that out of all the guns he's ever built, that was the one he didn't have the paperwork for or the receipt for. The state reminds Alec they were looking for the blackout at Christmas time in 2020, and Alec said they actually had a group of people trying to find it. But by the time turkey season rolled around, Paul had that gun. And then the state says it was stolen by a 12-year-old. Alec says, I didn't say a 12-year-old stole it. Look, they talk about the two 12-year-olds. If I said this, if they would have said two Utes, like my cousin Vinny, if you watch it, you know what I'm talking about. You ought to see me in the hallway. That had to drag me out. I'd have passed out from laughing. It goes back to him talking about how terrible Paul was about leaving his guns all over the place. It's not just Alec saying that, though. A lot of his friends and his brother said that was an issue, especially I think between Buster and Paul, because Paul would leave Buster's gun somewhere, not bring it home, and then it was up to Buster to track his gun down. Alex said he should have been stricter about the guns. So they get into his stealing again, and this time the check meant for Randy was discussed. That, if you remember, there was that one check. He had the firm recut the check. He cashed that, and then a year later, cashed the original check. Alex said he was told it was for him, and he cashed that check. He said the check that he cashed like a year later must have been in his desk, and it was probably just mixed in with a pile of checks he had that he needed to cash. But here's my thing. Do you think Alec Murdaugh let a check sit around for a year? That's those things that we know about the stealing and how he couldn't get his hands on enough money. So I think it could be hard for the jury to buy that he had a check for a big amount sitting in his desk for over a year. They go to the roadside shooting. Alec acknowledges lying, and the state points out hey, to make your friends and your family think the bad guys are back. He said people didn't believe what he said about the roadside shooting that were close to him, and it wasn't meant as something seeking sympathy. He said he didn't want to be on Earth and have Buster deal with the fallout of everything. He didn't want to have to see Buster deal with what Buster is dealing with right now. He said cousin Eddie didn't shoot him according to the plan. So what did he do? He lied. Prosecutor says, so your family thought two 12-year-olds were back. Then get this, Creighton Waters says that he and Alec were in law school together, but Mr. Waters was 2 years behind Alec. And Alec was like, I don't remember you. And I was like, ouch. So the prosecutor said you were perceived as successful. And they go back and forth about what is successful. Alec says, look, I made a lot of money if that's what you're asking, but you don't have huge self-esteem when you're an addict. And then the prosecutor says you've lived a life of possessive authority. And Alec's like, a what? And he's like, your badges. Remember we went through that Thursday, your badges, these solicitor badges that he said he didn't have on at the hospital after the boat crash. And then prosecutor's like, Exhibit A, which is a picture of that big badge hanging out. Look, the prosecution has had their very, very strong moments. I'm not pro this, pro that. I think right now, as far as what I've seen from the jury, it could be a very even playing field of people going back. I have not seen them react to one side more than the other. They've been very equal in their approval and disapproval based on head shakes, eye rolls, body language. It's pretty even across the board. So it's really hard to know what this jury's thinking. I've seen sympathy to Alec when he was on the stand. Never saw tears, by the way. I've had a lot of people ask me that. I did not see tears. And yes, yesterday, a juror put Kleenex in her ears. It was during when some audio was being played. It was very loud. So I'm definitely not assuming that she did it because she was bored or upset or didn't want to hear anything. I don't think it was meant to be any sign that she wasn't paying attention to that particular testimony. That can get loud in there. And so I'm going to give this person the benefit of the doubt and say maybe it was bothering her ears. People are sensitive to stuff like that, but we were all like, what is going on? In June of 2021, the prosecutor points out your dad's sick, you're coming into a financial crisis. And Alec said, these are issues like I've had many times in the past. Then he asked Alec, are you a family annihilator? And Alec's like, what? And then he says, no, I never hurt Maggie or Paul ever. And so I looked this up. In 90% of cases, a family annihilator is a male offender coming from a good, respectable family with no criminal record. Family annihilators are people who kill multiple members of their own families, often in response to financial, professional, or relational stressors. Alec points out he lied to his immediate family about the kennels and also lied to Tony Satterfield. Alec said even with the article the Island Packet put out about Alec getting a settlement in the Satterfield case, there was no increase by Tony inquiring about the settlement. The prosecutor says, well, people lie because they do something wrong. You want this jury to believe a manufactured story based on new things you said just yesterday for the first time, and Alec says that's not true. So we go to the crime scene body cam. At this point, unfortunately, they flashed Maggie's body on screen for everybody to see in the courtroom. It's the part of the clip where Alec's saying they're dead, aren't they? The officer is like, it appears that way. And so the prosecutor asked, why did you lie to that officer when he asked you when you were last with them? And you said 45 minutes before I went to my mom's. And so the good thing here is that the prosecutor points out this officer isn't from SLED. This is Colleton County. They haven't given you the gunshot residue. They haven't asked you about your relationships, and yet you still lied. I thought that was a great point by the prosecution, which is this wasn't SLED. This was, if anything, people, I think in the public's mind, Alec had influence over in this because they're Colleton County, not SLED. I thought that was great that he jumped on that. Alec said his family knew the roadside shooting was a lie. So the prosecutor said, when accountability is at your door, Mr. Murdaugh, bad things happen. Isn't that true? And Alec says, what do you mean by bad things? And I was literally like, okay, let's count the ways. So then June 7th happened. And then prosecutor says also September 4th happened. And Alec said, I don't believe June 7th happened because of accountability being at my doorstep. So on redirect, Jim Griffin points out Alec has pending charges for all those financial crimes. And I think that in pointing that out, maybe the strategy in pointing out he does have all these pending charges is that, hey, if you find there's reasonable doubt here, he's never going anywhere, essentially. And maybe that was a little nudge of if you don't think he did it or there's reasonable doubt, don't be afraid to stand your ground almost. He asked if he had Maggie's phone between 9:02 and 9:06, and Alex said he did not have her phone at all that night. When asked why he kept saying if they looked at his phone, he said, I knew whoever done this to them had Maggie's phone, and I knew my phone and Maggie's were never together that night. So he's asked about the inaccurate time he gave Sled, and Alex said he was trying to estimate, but he said, I always told them they could go back, check my cell phone records, and they would know for sure. When asked whether or not him being at the kennels would have advanced Sled's investigation, Alex said no, because when I left them, they were good. So the roadside shooting, he said he intended to be gone. I intended for him to shoot me, and I intended to be gone. Alex said the lie was because he didn't want Buster to know he tried to kill himself. Jim Griffin again, Alec, did you murder Maggie? He says, I would never hurt Maggie. Did you murder Paul? I would never hurt Paul. He said, if I was under pressure that they're talking about here, I can promise you I would hurt myself before I would hurt one of them without a doubt. Recross was really, really quick. The biggest point was the prosecution said Alec had made a new story to fit facts presented at the trial that shattered his original alibi. End of cross. So Monday, we're picking up with the defense final 4 witnesses. Should be done by the afternoon. The prosecution has a couple of quick rebuttal witnesses. It'd be great if we could start the rebuttal witnesses on Monday and maybe get to closings on Tuesday. But hey, look, y'all, I've had a blast down. I don't want to say a blast. This is a double murder trial. It's not a party. But at the same time, being there, I've made a ton of new, really, really amazing friends, listeners, media, all that jazz. The court staff's been amazing. Law and Crime has been amazing to me. They took a chance having me go down there for the biggest trial in years and the biggest trial in our state's history. And I've learned so much from them and their staff and the people that have helped me kind of figure out how to do lives. My knees still knock, y'all. I get nervous, but I'm grateful for the experience. But I'm also grateful that we are seeing a light at the end of the tunnel because I'm tired, y'all. I'm not gonna lie. I'm so disconnected from every other case that we cover. So my plan, once this trial has had a verdict and I do a final episode on that verdict, I've got major catch up to do on some cases that we followed for a very long time. Koberger, Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell. There's been some court hearings. I literally had not had time to do much more than just read a summary and put out a few articles here and there. So I'm going to catch up on everything that we have kind of let fall by the wayside while I've been in Walterboro. And then don't forget, April 3rd, just around the corner, Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell finally go to trial. Now, here's my plan. I will not be up there for the whole trial. It's easily going to be, we know 10 weeks. I say longer. They never really go within that time frame. Double murder trial, death penalty case, just 2 defendants. There's a triple murder for Tammy Daybell for Chad, and then conspiracy for Lori. But still, it's a big case. There are a ton of witnesses. I think it's going to be months. So I'm hoping to go up about every 3 weeks for a week. That's my goal right now. May go a little more in between there, maybe a little less here and there. Who knows? But I will be there at some point. And then we've got Koberger's preliminary in June. If that goes off, then I think it should. And so there's a lot going on this year. And this really just kind of kicked it off in a big way for the start of the year. It's crazy to think I've been down in Walterboro over a month now, with the exception of weekends. But man, has it been worth it. I've met some great people. And it always is awesome being back in the courtroom doing what I love. It's a lot easier when I have a computer, though, because handwriting notes and then trying to go back and retype the notes. I was definitely going through and trying to scan them into my computer, but you get chicken scratch about 2:00 and it's hard to read. So I'm just retyping these out. So not a crazy busy week as far as testimony goes. Like I say, Tuesday afternoon should be done. Then it's just closings and sit around, hurry up and wait game. I plan to do some driving around during deliberations so I can stay within a reasonable distance. So I'm going to go out to the Moselle gates, going to go where they found her phone, where they found Stephen Smith, try to go by the graves for Stephen Smith and Maggie and Paul, and not to gawk, but just to sort of be there and take it in and pay my respects at the graves of them. I'm not sure where Mallory Beach's grave is. I would like to go pay my respects as well, but I haven't found that one online. So that's kind of my plan for next week. Anjanette's in town. We got a few little get-togethers at different media people's residences that they've rented during the trial, just as kind of a big, hey, we were in the trenches together for 6 weeks. Let's have a little fun and let our hair down. And so I'm looking forward to that. Anyways, all right, guys, I will see you Monday from Walterboro. We'll hammer out what those last four defense witnesses say. Joe McCullough said on one of our live Q&As last week, one of the witnesses expect fireworks for the defense. I'm interested to see. I think one of them is going to be a forensic pathologist that they hired. I think it would be smart if they brought in a drug counselor, because both sides are bringing up the drug issues, and have somebody there who's a professional who talks about paranoia and things like that. I'm just thinking what would benefit the defense to further their quest to get an acquittal, or probably a hung jury would be a big win for them, I think. So, all right, I'll see you guys Monday night, kind of late, but I'll be there. We'll see you soon, guys.